Well, good morning, everybody. I can't see any faces. I'm talking to a blank screen, and luckily you can't see mine, so you're spared the vision of loveliness that is Steve Underwood. So welcome to our take on the golden thread. So we've put this presentation together in conjunction with the work that we've done with Field View over recent years, and this is not intended to be any in-depth treatise, but perhaps sort of a more practical take on things. So this is what I'd like to get through today, if we possibly can. It's how do we prescribe and define what the golden thread might be? Where does quality and compliance really sit? How do we manage it? How do we ensure it? How do we capture it? And then how do we assure that process? And following that, what is the value of assurance? So let's pick a nice, interesting example from the past. The picture on the slide you can see is Lypiat House, which was built in the 1600s. And to the best of my knowledge, has absolutely no EWS1 issues. There is no flammable, combustible material in any of the outside walls because it's solid Cotswold stone. It was, up until recently, the home of the Duke of Kent, but the real story with this place is the front gates. And I used to live down the road, and as kids, we used to go up and look at the front gates. So a bit more about the front gates. Here we go. So the Lord of the Manor was this really nasty guy called John Cox. And he wanted some new gates for his manor house. And the contract, and this is where I get into how do you actually define what it is that you want? The contract specified that the wrought iron gates had to be perfect in his eyes and his eyes only. And unfortunately, when the blacksmith finished them, they weren't, as far as he was concerned. So the poor old blacksmith was hung. Now, it's just a coincidence. I wrote this presentation on the 25th of January, and the legend goes that on the 25th of January every year, the blacksmith rides through the gates without his head on his big black horse. So there's a kind of that it is, how do you define quality and who actually controls it? As things go on, we get more and more complex definitions and more contract terms and more sort of detail that doesn't actually deal with the issue. So from my perspective, the real issue kind of sits here, and that's this. The guy holding the hand tools that actually builds the product is where quality and compliance sits. And there's the old phrase, the hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world. Well, I say the hand that holds the drill, all the tools, is the guy that really calls the shots when it comes to the quality assurance piece. And if we think about the cladding crisis and the things that have started the golden thread, a lot of it is to do with quality of workmanship actually on the work face. And we can all talk about everything being done for the lowest price and people cutting corners and bits and pieces, and we'll come back to that in a bit. But really, I believe that the quality and the golden thread exists at the workplace and not as a load of technical documentation. So back in my day, as a young site manager, I used to quite often go in on a Saturday morning, as most site managers did, and catch up with the paperwork. And I remember going into the office where the site engineer was, and he had inspection and test plans all over his desk, mainly for concrete, to be fair. And on Saturday morning, he was busy filling in his ITPs. And these were pre-pour ITPs and post-pour and all the bits and pieces that go with it. So the entire quality assurance piece was just a straightforward tick box exercise. And this was kind of born out of the BS 5750 era, when everything was a check sheet. And the only thing that actually got done was the check sheets got ticked, but nothing got checked because everybody was so busy filling in the check sheets. And that was that. So how do we kind of move on from a check sheet philosophy to something that actually works, that means something to the guys on site? So if you think of sort of any process, and here's the sort of my alternative to 3 steps to heaven, you have to define what it is that you're going to do. You then have to produce an algorithm, and it needs to be a visual flowchart so that everybody can understand it, because communicating what you're trying to achieve is as much the problem as anything else. From that, you can develop your inspection and test plans and define the hold points. Then the real key is you have to train and implement what you're doing. That is the key. It's no good having all of the golden thread stuff all over the place. It just becomes the Gordian knot. You actually need to train and implement the people that are doing the work. And then once you've done that, you're into the monitor and control process, which is easy if you've actually got the data. So in true Blue Peter fashion, here's one we did earlier. Now, this project is one that's just across the street from our office. It's at St Martin's Place, and it's a job that we built with a company called Crea, who did all of the precast work. So that is a proper pack of cards, Lego type building. And we designed it and decided to do it that way because of all the problems we were having trying to deliver a quality product in terms of the external envelopes. So we went right back to square one. We said, right, what's the initial design look like? Then we went to that with fabrication and mock-ups of the design. We then worked out how we could lay up the molds. So the architect had to work with Crea because we've got 4 or 5 different finishes within each panel. And those factory molds were very difficult to build in the first instance. We then decided that we would install the windows in the panels and off-site, not on-site. And all these panels were built over in Northern Ireland and shipped over. So once Crea had created the multifaceted panel, we gave it to Omar Windows to put their windows in. So the window man had to put his windows in their yard and then hand the panel back to Crea. We then did final checks prior to dispatching them, a delivery on site inspection, then they were installed and temporarily propped. They were then re-inspected once they were grouted up with a permanent fix, and then we inspected and signed them off with all the mastic and the seals that go around them. So just to give you a bit of an idea around that process, this is the sort of start of a panel being made, and you can see the first sort of layer being built up in the first picture over here with my magic pointer. And then as the panel got more complicated, you can see the layers of panel as it all gets built up. So all that was built over in Ireland. Then we actually had the Crea piece with the identification of completed panels and any defects that were associated with the panel, because obviously fixing a panel in the yard is a lot easier than fixing it once it's got to site. And then all the panels were all stacked up in their yards, and they had about 2 to 3 months worth of panels ready made in order that we could ensure that the delivery process was really smooth and we could deal with any kinds of delays. That worked really well, and we're really fortunate in that Crea as a company decided that the field view way of doing things was a good thing. And originally they were scared that it was just going to be used as a tool to beat them up with. But once they saw what we were trying to do, which was actually have an open system, Crea then went out and bought field view themselves and now use it to do their own quality control. So, if people buy it because they want it, not because you're forcing it on them, that's very much the way to be. So once the panels had been made and had been cured, they were all stacked up ready for transportation. And they had a yard that was about the same size as a football pitch that was full of, if you like, our panels. I think the project itself had something in the order of 1,506 components. So when you get to site, the picture on the left, there's the multifaceted panel. So you can see you've got brickwork on this one. Some of them have got exposed concrete. Then you've got the windows ready to go in. Now, these were ground floor ones that didn't have their windows, but these are these big double stacks. So that was all put together and then lifted in place in one piece. So you haven't got all of the construction detailing to do here where it all tends to go wrong. So we're able to build our building using something which we knew had a high degree of compliance. So next sort of step was actually putting the thing together as a whole. So we're building the panels up, and you can see the windows are in here. The guys are fixing the internal divides. Here's the sort of temporary propping, holding the stuff up when they're actually lining and leveling the panels, working within their control zone with all their sort of health and safety stuff. So as a system, it's really good. It takes away scaffold. It takes away a whole bunch of stuff that's just a problem if you do a traditional masonry product. Now, on that one, we actually started the precast the week that we said we would start it, and Korea finished it the week they said they would finish it. So you had no extensions of time and no delays. It was really quick and really certain. So I would recommend it to anyone. Anyways, back to field view and the golden thread. These are examples of the ITPs that actually were just lifted straight off the file out of the job, because obviously we've got a complete electronic record of the entire project from start to finish with the work that we did with Korea. So in here is the Korea panel being completed over in Ireland with the M&E slots and ducts done. There's the tickets to say as it was installed on site, and these are our guys' signatures. If you look in, you can see these little hyperlinks. These hyperlinks are where the photos link back to the database, so we know exactly where the picture was taken, when the picture was taken, and what the picture was of. And so the process moved on. And this is to prove that it wasn't all perfect. Here's an NCR where someone's identified a problem. So there's a picture of the problem, there's a location of the problem. So we actually have the management and control by the guys on site, and we gave every guy on site a tablet so they could walk around, take their photos and do the stuff without having to come back to the office and sit in an office filling out bits of paper. You need boots on the ground, and this is the way to do it. Enable the boots on the ground to take the office with them and not have to come back, because when they're back in the office, they're not supervising what's going on. So if you've got all this data, and we have got literally thousands and thousands of data points, we started to get through the field view process, these what I call waterfall diagrams. And it doesn't really matter what's on it, but what you can see is green and red squares. So and you can see what's green and what's red and what's hanging at the back. So you actually get a live picture of your product. So I'll blow one of those up for you now. There you go. And hopefully you can see that, which shows the location and the task. This is a fairly simple section of the whole process. And what we then started to do with this is, instead of just using it as snagging and process, the QSs suddenly woke up to the fact that they could use this as a valuation tool. So when we were doing our valuations, we were able to say upstream to our clients, this is what's been done, here are the records. And downstream to the subcontractor, we could say, this is what you've done, this is what is green, this is what we're going to pay you for. So we didn't have any arguments or disputes around the work that was being done on site or interim valuations, because it was what it was. No arguments, no ifs, no buts. And that saves an awful lot of time and aggro and just sort of general messing about. So that worked very, very well. The other issue that comes with this is that because the job was built in Northern Ireland, effectively, and a lot of the material value is in Northern Ireland, we were able to use this for the vesting applications as well. So the PQS, who didn't really want to go to Ireland to count panels in a field, was able to do checks on the individual components, because obviously the materials off-site element of this project was absolutely huge. So there's all the process that we went through and how we actually managed to manage that, which links very closely to what we're going to have to do in terms of cladding remedials and following the golden thread. But the real, perhaps, product of all this comes here. The difference and the distinguishing factors between quality assurance and insurance. Now, if you think about the sort of the latest bits on the BBC and the other sort of social media, where leaseholders are getting up in arms because they're copping for huge costs in terms of waking watches, temporary fire alarms, and now they're talking about tenfold increases in building insurance costs. So the value of the quality assurance that you're able to provide for your finished building massively impacts the cost of the insurance policy that the leaseholder then has to take out, or the freeholder has to take out, to insure the building. So you're now actually seeing value from assurance as a cost saving in insurance. And really speaking, this is the only way forward. So if we take that as, you know, a reasonable given, better quality assurance through the golden thread should mitigate the insurance catastrophe that's about to unfold. And how that's going to be resolved is anybody's guess. And my take on it, just for you know, an opinion, is that probably the government are going to have to sort of stand behind the second level insurance of the original insurance companies, so that normal claims will be dealt with through insurance, but the whole Grenfell Tower disaster of a building actually burning up completely would be backed by the government. That way they could probably maintain insurance policies at something which was reasonably economic that leaseholders could actually afford. But something's got to be done around that. So where do we go, having spent all this time and effort in actually working with Fieldview to produce a system that gives us the ability to track and produce the golden thread? So what we decided to do, on the basis that we've done a lot of conversions and permitted development projects where we've had to do facade remedials in the past, as well as new build stuff, we decided to perhaps get into the facade remediation business. So here's what is probably our first pucker starting from square one facade job. This is in the centre of Birmingham. It's the old Royal Angus Hotel, which our sort of sister company, Severn Capital, have acquired. And what we're doing with that is we're taking all of the external envelope off and rebuilding with a new envelope in order that we can actually assure the entire piece. And we're using the golden thread. So we've devised and defined the process that we're going to use. So when we start rebuilding this, which will probably be just after Easter, because at the moment we are in for planning, because the facade treatment is slightly different and it requires planning over and above a Section 72 agreement. And that's what we're on with. So we're actually working our way through some new schemes now, and we're looking at schemes from a remediation process. So if we look at the cladding journey in its sort of entirety, it sort of sits like this. This is, you know, abstracting all of the words that are bound up in the Building Safety Fund, where you've got initial investigations, consultations, and the pieces that sit within that. This is quite a long and lengthy process, just using the simple sort of examples from the Building Safety Fund. And we spent some time thinking our way through all this stuff. And what we've actually done is we've started to produce something which is a bit more complex, because we're finding issues now that managing agents and fire consultancies and leaseholders, there's a whole disparate community, all with a problem that no one seems to be able actually to tie up. So maybe the golden thread actually is a lasso around which we could use to pull the whole thing together. So we worked some more on the actual process, and we came up with something which was a bit more comprehensive, which we could share with the sort of leaseholders, the freeholders, and the managing agents. And we've spent the last probably month and a half talking with managing agents and leaseholders and freeholders about how we can actually speed up the entire BSF process. And the process has not really been helped by the stages necessary to go through to procure funds. You've got stage ones and stage twos, and the deadline, which was sort of artificially imposed, in my opinion, back just before Christmas, where everybody had to get funding bids in. And the problem with those funding bids was that the funding bid did not have anything like the level of detail or information needed to make it a comprehensive price. So we're now seeing issues where precursory funding bids only represent probably 25 to 30% of the actual cost. So now, with the furore around Section 20 agreements, costs are going through the roof, but it's not a question of cost going up. It's that the costs were never really identified in the first place. And what we're finding as we're looking at the projects is that the cladding remediation piece, the actual pure piece of the work, is probably only 25% of the actual cost of the job when you add in all of the logistical challenges and the fact that you've got to take it apart to put it back together. And that doesn't include the sort of costs that you might get if you had to completely decant a building, because where you need to get inside, if you like, tenants or occupants' premises, working with tenants in occupation, in live occupation, inside their premises, maybe 20 stories up the side of a skyscraper. It's just not on. So decant may be the only real option to deal with some of the fire break issues. So there's a quick trot through how we have looked at the golden thread, the cladding piece, how we've used the knowledge that we've gained in actually building new builds and doing, if you like, permitted development, redevelopments of stuff that was constructed a little bit before the bulk of the sort of SFS world, and how we brought that together to produce a, if you like, a creditable solution. So if anybody of you have emailed Angelique any questions, we'll have a go at answering those. And Angelique is nodding her head in the corner there. Yeah. So we'll go to some Q&A. So over to you, Angelique. An easy question, please.
So John Griffiths has asked, are the field view sheets linked back to the BIM model?
Not at the moment, but they can be, and that is perhaps the next step. When we've got a fully integrated BIM model, we can link field view and the sheets back to it. We've almost got it by default in that for the building across the street, we did a large Navisworks Revit model to actually do all of the panels. So it would be a fairly small step to actually get BIM 2 or even nearly BIM 3 compliance just by spending a bit more time working it through.
John has also asked, was the valuation process automated or manual process using the field view process sheets?
We had obviously schedules for all of the individual panels. So it was in many ways account panels tick the completed box to get the answer equals. Because of the way that the panels are made, and there's a large upfront cost in actually building the molds, which is not part of the, if you like, the field view click process, because they are very much bespoke items. Once you're into laying up and building molds, yes, we can do that.
David Stevens has asked, did the QA sheets link to the programme to provide progress?
Yes. We used Ask the Power project, obviously, to do, I think it's got a new name now, isn't it? The software, is it Even Works or something? And we linked the two together so that our planner was able to update his programs using the waterfall diagrams. And that worked really, really well. The trick will be when we move from doing waterfall diagrams for essentially sort of individual cards in the pack into a more sort of seam process when we're doing, say, remediation of the cladding of the outside of a building, where we'll have to identify those tasks. So if we go back to that staircase that I drew, when we're working out the flow diagram, that's a lot of work needs to go in to get that right in order that the process is easy to manage.
There's another question. When using a manufacturer and contractor who are not part of the same company, how do you address adoptability of the software between the two companies?
Well, for the example across the street with Crea, we said to Crea right at the beginning, we are going to use field view to do our process mapping, and this is the system we're going to use. Now, at first, they were a bit wary of that because I think in the past they'd been exposed to main contractors who'd used the, if you like, electronic snagging medium merely as a tool to beat them up. And they'd had a lot of problems in dealing with other main contractors. So we said, well, we need to break the mold here and we need to work with you to make this happen. And that's exactly what we did. So the field view scheme, if you like, we had open access. So as long as they were involved with the project, they could see the whole picture. So it wasn't a question of us saying, you haven't done this, you're delaying us. They could see exactly who was doing what and where. And they then understood how important they were to the process. And I think that the testament to that is that CREA decided that they would adopt field view to use in their production facilities to monitor their own work. So as well as having, if you like, the field view system for St Martin's Place, they started using it for themselves and they bought it themselves. And like I said, if someone buys something voluntarily, we didn't force it on them, then it must have some value.
Next question, will the entire thread be within field view or will you be integrating third-party applications?
I think for simplicity, we will try and do it all within field view. Part of the piece that we've put together is we would like to be able to offer a sort of a product liability insurance against a remediated remediated building. So we've been talking to the insurance market about this. And in order to keep things clean and simple, I think we need one audit trail all the way through the product so that it's simple. If we have things that link to other stuff, it all starts to get complicated. So we may have to work a bit harder with Viewpoint to get this, but that's where we want to go. We want a single system solution.
Thank you, Troy, for asking that question. Another question from John Griffiths is, do you get an automated progress report out of field view on cost, programme and quality?
We haven't gone that far. We tend to do it by hand, as using field view on St Martin's Place at that level of complexity actually moved the product on from where we'd used it past as purely a snagging tool. And if you go to field view's Viewpoint's website, we did some videos with them whilst we were just starting the process. And part of the sort of the issue for me is you kind of need to do it in steps. So we decided on what we thought we might be able to achieve with St Martin's Place and set our goal there. We then worked with field view to produce what we needed to produce. And then we used it. We didn't meddle with it halfway through. We kind of stuck to what we decided was the task. And for our next project, we will then make the next evolutionary step. So, but say, if you go to field view, and I'm sure that they'll put the links up for you, you can actually see the videos that we made as sort of this is what we're trying to achieve.
Another question from John is, do field view write the algorithms based on your process map?
I think we engineered our process map into the algorithms, but they did help us. And because field view seems to be extraordinarily flexible, and if you like, the authors of the software quite like a challenge, and they need to develop their product to meet the needs of the industry, they seem to be very amenable to working on developing the software to suit.
And another question from John is, does field view form the health and safety manual for the build process?
We can do that, and that is very much in our minds for the next project, to use field view as part of the O&M material. Obviously, we've done an awful lot of work with our sister company, 7 Capital, because we're now having to produce EWS1 forms for previous buildings that we built. And if only we had the level of detail that we have for St Martin's Place in a field view system that was done as a process, it would be so much easier. So it's getting quite a fag to go back to buildings and get all of the information and the details to produce EWS1 forms. At this sort of juncture, we're at 12:14, and I think the plug is being pulled out at 12:15. So if you've got a final quick question?
No, that's all. All questions have been answered, unless anybody has one that they want to sort of get in quickly.
It has been within 5 seconds. So thank you for listening if you haven't got any. The details for Angelique are on the video conference call. So if you've got other questions, please ping them through and we'll do our very best to answer. So thank you for joining in.